I'm going to discuss how racialized repression as a form of threat affect mobilization. Racialized repression takes place when a state and its citizens single out a particular racial or ethnic group for harassment. The targeted group is usually viewed as different from and inferior to the dominant group in society. They're considered to be untrustworthy and threatening, and as a result, they are subjected to both state and non-state repressive actions. This repressive action causes the group to feel threatened and to live in a constant state of fear. So we could think of Arab Americans in the post 9/11 era. They were considered as a threat to the United States, and as a result, they suffered from 25 security initiatives targeting them specifically. The security initiatives resulted in thousands of detainments, thousands of deportations of Arab Americans, and forced registration, and 200,000 forced FBI interviews. The FBI interviews resulted in part from calls that report suspicious behavior by Arab Americans. There were 96,000 such calls within 1 week of 9/11. Suspicious behavior by Arab Americans included things such as opening and closing their car trunk, using public restrooms, using their phones, speaking Arabic in public. So these things are really not threatening in and of themselves. They were threatening because Arab Americans were doing them. And we can see also non-state repression in the form of 700 incidents of hate crime against Arab Americans within 9 weeks of 9/11. And 19 Arab Americans died as a result of the 9/11 backlash. All those acts of repression resulted in a culture of fear among Arab Americans, or what Nadine Naber would call interment of the psyche. So interment of the psyche is a state of being where a person feels that he or she is under constant surveillance, that they are under constant threat of being targeted at any time for repression or discrimination. And we see that Arab Americans suffered from this sense of threat. So, for example, in my research on the relationship between fear and protest among Arab Detroit, I worked in this project with Dr. Wayne Santoro. We found that about 82% of Arab Americans who lived in Detroit reported feeling some form of threat because of the post 9/11 backlash. We also found that people who felt threatened were more likely to protest than Arab Americans who were not afraid at all as a result of the 9/11 backlash. And we argue that people who felt threatened were more likely to be aware of their inferior status or their new inferior status as Arab Americans. They were more likely to have experienced repression or know of someone who did. Because of experiences of repression, these Arab Americans are more likely to feel a heightened sense of Arab identity. They're more likely to feel in-group solidarity. They're also more likely to feel other emotions that fear might cause, such as anger, frustration, humiliation, all of which would increase protest participation. So we believe that these people were more likely to protest because of all of these feelings, but also because they don't like to be afraid. So fear is not a good feeling, and people usually protest against things that they do not like. So in the case of Arab Americans, the majority of protests that took place in the post 9/11 were against grievances that causes fear. So for example, they protested against mistreatment of Arab children at schools, they protested against immigration targeting of community leaders, and they protested against IRS scrutinizing Muslim charities. So our results suggest that the causes of the threat is most important in determining whether it will cause protest or not. People who feel threatened not because they protest, but because of who they are. So, for example, their racial status, their immigration status, sexual orientation. These people are more likely to protest because of the threat.